Welcome to Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Bobbi Pominville. I'm your reporter on the arts, and I have a very interesting interview for you to watch today. I've called back one of my friends. His name is Jack Stamp. You may recall he is just a fabulous musician, and composer is going to be the main topic today. But I do want to give his resume. Jack has a BS in music education from Indiana University of Pennsylvania. He has been director of band studies at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. He has a Doctor of Musical Arts in Conducting at Michigan State University. That's another facet I'd like to do someday. Okay, he's an international composer and a former adjunct professor at UWRF. Now today we're going to focus on Jack and his composing skills. And he has been busy doing things. I love that creativity piece. So we're going to talk about one of Jack's recent compositions, and it's sort of a world premiere recording by the Minnesota Orchestra Brass Quintet. They are called the Uptown Brass, which we will shortly view on this show. But first of all, Jack, it's time for you to tell us about this composition.
Well, thank you, Bobbi. It's great to be back. I was checking, our last interview was back in August. Lots of things have happened since August. This particular piece is called Introit. Now, for most of you viewers, you might know that word. It appears a lot in a church bulletin as the first piece of music you ever hear in a church service, because it's an announcement. It's like a fanfare. And I've kind of adopted that name. I'm going to give you a little bit of music history here, not enough to bore you, hopefully. But there was a very famous German composer. His name was Paul Hindemith. And Mr. Hindemith actually came and settled in America during World War II and taught at Yale for years. He wrote a sonata for every single instrument in the orchestra, every instrument. And then another famous composer who I quoted on the last show as writing one of my favorite pieces, Vincent Persichetti, who taught it at Juilliard for years, started writing solo pieces for instruments. So these sonatas by Hindemith were with piano. Persichetti wrote unaccompanied pieces, and he called them parables. Well, I got my name in band composing initially by writing fanfares for a full band. So I decided I would embark on a series of introits, basically for people to begin a recital with. So I've written a piece for solo clarinet. I've written a piece for solo trumpet that's an introit. I've written a duet for trombone and tuba that's an introit. So naturally, I wrote this piece called Introit for brass quintet. It was actually a commission, but it was more of a request from my colleagues at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. After I'd retired, they ended up hosting the National Horn Conference, French Horn Conference, and their brass quintet, the resident brass quintet there, known as the Hootlebug Brass, they were going to open the concert, and they asked me if I would write them a piece to open the concert. So that's where Introit came from. So basically what you're going to hear with the Uptown Brass is the second performance ever, and actually the recording that they did of it.
That's absolutely fabulous. I don't believe I've ever had anything on this show close to a premiere. So thank you. I'm so glad that I somehow contacted you and this came out, and I wanted to feature it. Now, I have some other questions about that.
Sure.
I was wondering musically, is there a certain form you are using for this piece?
Yeah, that's a good question, Bobby. In fact, I like your question. I tell my composition students, you don't have to sound like Mozart or Beethoven, but you have to think like them. And what I mean by that is your music has to have form. Now, you could trace the form of this piece back to Mozart or Beethoven, but I've stolen forms from that era and compounded them. So in other words, what you'll hear is you'll hear this main theme, but this main theme comes back 2 more times. Well, in Mozart's era, that was called a recapitulation, and that was sonata form, but it would only come back once. So if it comes back more than once, it's called a rondo, but it's not quite a rondo either. So I've kind of made these hybrid forms of the traditional forms from the classical era. You'll hear lots of imitation in this music. In other words, where it's like a round, like row, row, row your boat. You'll hear a little bit of a round. Then you'll hear a Renaissance technique from the 1600s called hocket. And what that means is the melody is broken up between instruments. So you'll hear the high instruments state half of the melody, the low instruments answer them with the rest of the melody. Now that's a very old form, that's 500 years old. But yet I've combined all these types of forms to create a formal structure in the piece.
Well, see, I thought I was hearing repetition, and I thought I was hearing almost like a fugue going on between the instruments.
You're exactly right.
Say, it might have been the high and the low brass, but if I were studying it in college, wouldn't that be a great thing to learn?
Well, you see, when I started writing music, I've written a lot for school bands. And I thought that my music should not just make them sound good, but teach them something about the compositional process. So I tried to include techniques by the great masters. Now, I don't consider myself a great master, but I was trying to include techniques that could teach them concepts in music. And that just spills over into my other music. And in Introit, you were right, you heard repetition, but a lot of these repetitions come back in a different key center. So it'll be a step higher or a step lower or something like that.
Yes, and I think that goes back to the masters too.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I find that, I don't know, when I'm listening, I like to hear some kind of form. And years of going to the Minnesota Orchestra have taught me a lot, because instead of just sitting there and looking at the lights or the cubes, I was always trying to analyze, and I find that fascinating. So I love to hear that from you.
Well, and the thing is, I believe you have to have form like that, because when I write music, I not only write for self-expression and for the players, but I do write for the audience. And the audience needs something to, what I call, hang their hat on. And that, for instance, that repetition, they say, well, I think I've heard that before. It keeps them engaged in the piece. I don't write music and quote the great Milton Babbitt and say, who cares if you listen? I mean, I care if you listen, and I want there to be something for you to listen to, and I want it to be somewhat audience friendly.
Yeah, and see, I don't know, I kind of tap into a lot of your ideas. I think that's really quite brilliant what you're doing. Now, what do you want the listener to imagine when hearing the music? Well, you kind of went into that. You want them to hear some form.
Right. I mean, this is not what we call programmatic music. It's not telling a story. I mean, I just want them to hear the energy of the music and that it has a lot of life and it's happy music and it's like the pronouncement of something that's going to happen. In fact, this piece will open this new CD recording.
Oh, good. I was glad to hear that, and I really want to hear your CD. But we'll go into that a little bit later. Okay, now, how did you begin to compose this? You already kind of told me what you had in mind, but were you thinking about a fanfare?
Well, I was thinking about something that's like a pronouncement, but you know, I'm this is going to be a little bit heady, but I think people understand this. I have this acronym called SHMRF, and that's SHMRF: sound, harmony, melody, rhythm, and form. And so I think about a piece. Well, my sound was a brass quintet. I couldn't change that. But how was I going to start this piece? I decided to start it with harmony. And there's this little tune, da 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 da. But really, what it is these 5-note block chords moving. And so I thought I would start this with a harmonic figure and then peel off of that a little melodic motif, which is da 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 ba 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 bum. But it really, my concept started with writing this harmonic motive, and then, of course, the F in SHMRF is form. Then how do I combine it to have it make sense in continual sense?
Oh, you should be teaching this. This is great stuff.
For a reason.
You know, music history can be boring. I never found it that way, but I think it can be. But I kind of feel like if the teacher, I could imagine you teaching at the university, and if you were bringing it out in this way, I think it would really stick. I think that the students would really find something to listen for.
Well, you don't want to get me started on the music appreciation and the way that's taught to the non-music people. I think it's totally wrong. Totally wrong. And I call it music depreciation. It makes those students not interested in the great music, the great classical music. And I have a whole other, we could talk another show on that.
All right. We might go into that at some time, but I guess I have to say I kind of agree with you on that one, although I'm not that connected with the university, so I'm going to reserve my opinion. Okay, now how on earth did you get connected then with the Minnesota Orchestra, and how was your piece chosen by that group?
Well, what actually happened was that a friend of mine who just retired from Tartan High School in Oakdale, his name is Tony Tehan. He was the band director there, and he's a wonderful trumpet player. Well, I met Tony back in the 80s when he was a student at Cincinnati Conservatory. Well, then when I moved up here 5.5 years ago, I realized that he was local. So Tony and I linked up and have, go to concerts together, have lunch, have dinner, have coffee. Well, he was a good friend of the fourth trumpet player and the jazz trumpet player from the Minnesota Orchestra, Charles Lazarus.
Yes.
And Chuck, through Tony, Chuck and I became friends. And then when he talked to me about the Uptown Brass, which is the brass quintet from the Minnesota Orchestra, I gave him one of my published pieces, a suite for brass quintet. But then they said that I think they played a movement or two on a concert. Then I decided to write him a piece. And I wrote him a piece actually called Mill City Flourish. And they played that on several concerts. In fact, they played it this summer when they were doing some of those outdoor concerts. And so then I started linking up with them and I wrote them another piece. So I decided, these guys play so well. I'd love to capture their sound. And so because of COVID, it's very hard to do large ensembles, but small ensembles are possible. So I asked them if they would be willing to record my music. And they said, sure. So I decided to compile then a compact disc, a disc of my chamber music, music for smaller ensembles or individual instruments, including those introits that I had written before. And 3 of the pieces, including the introit that you're going to hear, the Mill City Flourish that I wrote for them, and then another piece, a longer piece called Gamble. Those 3 pieces were recorded by the Uptown Brass, and we recorded them at Creation Audio in downtown Minneapolis, right there on Nicollet.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, we're going into that CD in a little bit, but you gave us little bits there. I like that. Now, this is basic, but we have listeners that are probably not well known and well knowing of all the arts and that. So let's talk about what instruments are in a brass quintet. Do you have the list of who the personnel are in the Minnesota group?
Sure.
And I thought we just promote that. You mentioned Charles Lazarus, yes?
Right. So the instrumentation of a brass quintet, obviously quintet is 5 instruments. There are 2 trumpets, a French horn, a trombone, and a tuba. So the 2 trumpets are Doug Carlson from the orchestra and Chuck Lazarus or Charles Lazarus. And the horn is principal horn in the orchestra, Michael Gast. And the trombonist is Doug Wright, who again is principal trombonist in the orchestra. And then the tuba is principal tuba, Steve Campbell. And you know what's amazing about these gentlemen? And you would think, I shouldn't say you would think, you would understand if they took the recording of my music as kind of a pedantic kind of, this is what we do, we'll record it, we'll get out of it. That's not how they approached it. They approached it with real ownership, like they wanted to get it right. In other words, when I'd say at the recording session, that's good, that one of them would say, no, I didn't like what I did on that 3rd note in bar 14. And we'd go back and do it again. I mean, beside them being superb musicians and dedicated to the process, they are also terrific people. And it was really just a joy to be with them.
I think that level of excellence, and what a joy for you to be able to give them a piece of yours and not have them just pass it off and say, oh, we do this all the time, whatever, we can do it well. But they really care about what they do, and they put so much into it.
They sure did. And
you know, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And that's why they approach that. That's what makes them successful professionals, I think.
I agree. And that type of music is, I think of a fanfare at the orchestra. I could see them playing that, in the lobby at Orchestra Hall. And I love to listen to music like that. The best thing I found with yours was it was so joyful. And maybe in this time of being home so much, I was needing to listen to some music that was really upbeat. And yours was.
I appreciate that.
So I enjoyed it. So anyway, now we're going to talk about your CD more. It's called Recitatives and Episodes, great title, The Chamber Music of Jack Stamp. Now, are you telling me you've been working on this for years, or did this just happen in a year? I don't know about
that's a good question. Well, because of COVID and because of the Uptown Brass, initially trying to get them to record, then I asked them, I asked Chuck especially, because Chuck has been real helpful, Chuck Lazarus. I said, you think you could get some other members of the orchestra to record for me? So he was able to get 4 string players, which they called themselves the Whittier Quartet, because the area where Creation Audio is kind of called Whittier, and they all live in that area. And they played a piece that I wrote for string quartet that had only had 1 performance again. They recorded the piece, and it was called Recitatives and Episodes. Oh. And then Silver Anome, who's the associate principal, who was the cellist in this Whittier quartet, also recorded a elegiac lament for solo cello, which will be on this recording. So I was able to tap into my friends in the orchestra and their resources to add additional music. And I said, well, I've got other pieces that have been recorded that I could put together and make a complete CD of my chamber music.
Wonderful. Now, you're kind of borrowing from the vocal world when you say recitative. So what kind of a piece would that be?
Right. I'm glad you asked that. My first string quartet was recorded by a student quartet at Vanderbilt University, and they were terrific. And it went on a disc from Vanderbilt. Their recording will be on this disc as well. But as a present to them for doing this recording, out of their love of playing, I wrote them a piece for their senior recital, because the quartet was having their senior recital, and then they were all graduating from Vanderbilt and going other places. So I wrote them a piece called Recitatives in Aria. Recitative, for you people that don't understand, it would be just a solo pronouncement by a voice in an opera to kind of further the drama.
Right.
And what I did then is write a little concerto. So the recitatives are features for the first violin, the second violin, the viola, and the cello. And then they each have a little episode where they are the featured soloist with the rest of the quartet. So that's where the name Recitatives and Episodes. And I thought that was a great title for the disc.
Oh, I love that you added the aria part, because, you know, to those of us in the vocal world, you got to have a recitative and an aria. And there are so many that are just wonderful favorites of mine. But now you've taken this to a different world. You're doing instrumentals with it. And I like that too, because you're adapting.
Well, there's that borrowed form again, you see.
There it is.
I talked about earlier, I'm borrowing from the vocal tradition,
Yes.
but putting it in the instrumental world.
Yes. And I think that's really great. I mean, my little bit of experience, as you know, in the instrumental world is alto saxophone, and I did play violin. But my majors were voice and piano. So, but I love this because it really feeds me when I'm going to hear a concert and I hear different things like the orchestra. And I love string quartets, Jack. And I love cello solos.
Oh,
so you just touched that
so beautifully. He played it like he'd written it for him. It was amazing.
Well, I can't wait to hear that. I feel a little bit bad that I haven't heard your CD yet, but I will. I know we could spend a class on that too. So is there, what's your future with composing after this? That's kind of my last question.
Well, it's interesting. I've written a few arrangements for the Uptown Brass for some upcoming performances. They're going to be recording, because again, everything's virtual right now with the symphony. They're recording a small video to be released for the holidays. And I'm not sure if my piece will be on there, but I've written them an arrangement of In the Bleak Midwinter.
Oh.
And then also the orchestra will do some kind of commemoration of Martin Luther King Day. And I've written them, the Uptown Brass, a version of the Negro spiritual Deep River. So I'm hoping that those will happen. Then I've taken on some, I was thinking about when we were talking and you were going to interview me, I was thinking about my composition world has come full circle. When I started, I would write pieces for free just to get people to play them. And once I was known as a composer, then you get commissioned, you get asked and paid to write pieces. And now that I'm retired, I've gone back to writing pieces for friends for free. Oh. And my friends that I'm writing for now are even at a higher quality than they were when I first started writing, like the Uptown Brass. So, but it's become full circle. So one of the things I'm doing, in fact, I was working on it right before we started this interview, is there's a great composer in the Twin Cities. His name was John Zadeklik. And John was a great band composer, went to the University of Minnesota, taught at, I think it's White Bear Lake Community College, or at least the community college in White Bear Lake. And unfortunately, John was in failing health and then passed away this spring due to some complications of COVID. And I first played his music when I was a college student in 1975. And we got to be friends because we're published by the same publisher, Neil Chose Music. But anyway, when he passed away, there was an outpouring of sentiment and commemoratives and wonderful accolades said about John. And Chris Chernahoy, our friend, said he wrote us a piece when I was band director at Hudson High School called St. Croix Suite. And I kind of scratched my head and I said, I have never heard of that piece. John has a lot of pieces published. So I got a hold of Ryan McCarthy, who's the band director now. And I said, you guys have this piece. So he texted me back and he goes, I've got good news and bad news. We have the parts. We don't have a score. I said, well, give me the parts. So when I look at the parts, all the parts are handwritten, and they're all handwritten in different manuscripts. And I was going to, I haven't asked Chris yet if all the students copied their own parts. But this piece doesn't really exist now. So what I'm doing with the help of one of my former students is we're loading it onto computer, and it's a 4-movement suite. We're loading it on computer, and we're going to send it to John's publisher to see if they'll publish it posthumously as a memorial to John Zedeklik. And it's a wonderful piece. And all I've got left, I've done the first movement. My students done 3 and 4, and I'm halfway through the second movement. But hopefully I'll have it done before Christmas, and maybe this piece will get published that no one knew about and was written for our Hudson High School band.
Oh, that's so good to hear. You know, it's just neat to hear that. That really brings it home to Hudson. And yeah, I've worked with Ryan McCarthy a little bit myself. He was really good to me in many ways. I had to learn the conga drum in an hour.
Yeah, he's a good teacher and a good person. He really is.
Yes, he is. And I'm total support of not just voice, but band music too. I love it all. Okay, so anyway, what a great interview you did today. So now, do you want to just set us up to hear your introit? Just introduce it for the final piece or final thing, or do you feel like you've said enough?
Well, I'll just say that this is a video from the actual recording session in the studio at Creation Audio, and this is really the final mix of the introit for brass quintet with the Uptown Brass performing. And the CD that we're talking about should actually be, it is not released yet, so you haven't heard it because it hasn't been released. Probably will be released in January on a company called Mark Records out of Clarence, New York. But it should be on iTunes and Spotify and all those places as well.
Oh, that's a very good lead in, because a lot of us search out there for those different things. Well, Jack, I just love interviewing you. I really need to have you back sometime.
Well, again,
I know that we're going to have to come back when you've got another CD or piece for us. Will you let me know?
Well, I've got one in the works of my vocal music.
You do?
I do, and we're going to record that hopefully the end of January.
Oh boy. Well, next year, then, I know it's not that far off, but next year, then we'll be in contact.
That'll be great.
All right. Thank you so
Bobbi,
much.
Thank you for your support of the arts constantly, and how important it is during this time where they can be neglected. You know, the great conductor Wilhelm Furtwängler of the Berlin Philharmonic back in the 40s said, never did a society need music more when they think they could do without it.
Oh, that's so well said.
We don't want that to happen because of COVID, and I appreciate your efforts to keep it alive. So thank you so much.
Oh, I just enjoy you so much. I mean, it's like we're in a couple different worlds, but we get along so well, and we really have good conversations. I appreciate that so much, Jack. And keep up all your great composing and promoting of music. You really should be teaching still. But we can have a little mini classroom here.
There we go.
All right. So thank you very much. And I believe I should thank the audience for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed the show. I hope you enjoy the piece you're going to hear. And I do believe you're going to hear some of the pieces from the CD coming up later too. So again, I thank my audience for listening today.